Okay, our second tutorial here is going to discuss the required elements that are included in this speech. And even though you're all talking about all different topics, I always like to have everybody have a few things that they have to do. So this one is a little bit different from the first speech. In the first speech, you only had required elements in the introduction and in the conclusion. But for this one, we have required elements in the introduction, in the body, and in the conclusion. So let's start with the introduction. As you can see in the outline template, it is there for you to see, but somewhere in your introduction, I want a question. And most people start out with a question, but you're certainly not limited to that. I love creativity. I love you to think on your own, but I want at least one question. Most people do a series of questions, and you can see from some of the examples that I've given you in the announcements tab kind of how that goes. And I like questions because it automatically sort of starts this process with an audience. Okay, you don't really want their answer, but when you ask someone a question, you let them know that you're engaging in a conversation and you want them to think about something. So use it that way. Use as many questions as you want. Use them anywhere you want. I just want somewhere in that opening 20 to 30 seconds to have that element included. The other element that I want included in your introduction is your first go around at using a statistic, a number, with a source together. So find that number, and the more startling, the more attention grabbing, the more provocative the statistic, the better. And this will get you then started in your speech. Now, it's not a required element, but I will always encourage you to go back to that bridge statement at some point and use that one word, today. Today, I want to talk about this. All right? You can phrase it any way you want, but at the end of that introduction, there should be some statement of fact as to exactly where you're going with the rest of your speech. So those are the requirements for the introduction. A question or a series of questions, and a stat with a source. Okay? Moving on to the body. We are going to require here at least two instances of statistics and sources joined together. And there's a great phrase that I teach that will always ensure that you never miss out on this. It's this: according to. Because many people use the number and forget to use the source. When you say that phrase, according to, I know that the source is about to come. According to the National Institute of Health, according to a study done at Harvard University, according to an article published in the Wall Street Journal. When you say that phrase, according to, I know that you've got the source included. And then the number can follow. Now, of course, you can flip-flop this. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with saying 50% of all Americans have no trust in the media, according to a recent survey done by Pew Research. Okay? There you flipped it. You gave the number and then the source. Perfectly fine. But just remember, the family has to be together, right? The kids, which are the statistics, and the source, which are the parents, they got to be together, okay? That's how you build the credibility. And like I said in the earlier one, this can lead you to several instances of numbers being used with sources. But for the purpose of this, I want two. And those two have to be different. Okay, you can't cite the CDC 4 different times with 4 different sets of numbers. I want at least 2 different sources in here. Don't try to fool me with this now. Okay? That's not to say that you can't go back if you have multiples you can go back. But if you're going to do those two, I want two separate research sources. All right? And remember, sources can be people, Dr. John Smith, but usually when they are people, you also want to include where they're from. Dr. John Smith from the Florida Institute of Mental Health, okay? Because the name doesn't really mean all that much unless it's very well known. But sources can be entities. The University of Pennsylvania, according to a study at Florida State University's Centers for Disease. Okay? So I hope you get the point that if you just keep going along this credibility timeline, you'll begin to see how we really need numbers with sources in order to be a totally airtight, credible source for your talk. And you can use as many of these as you want. The requirement is 2. All right? And then in the conclusion, I always want a very strong statement. I think I told you last time, right? I always like to say to the class, in conclusion, let me punch you in the face. In conclusion, think about this. What we don't want are these regurgitations. In conclusion, today I told you this, this, and this. I already ate that, okay? I don't want to eat it again. Use the conclusion to make a bold statement, to be provocative, to have something for the audience to do or to think about or to act upon. This is when you want to get as close to your audience as possible when you conclude, okay? So we have that call to action that you can use. You know, in conclusion, I want you to think about this and have a strong statement and then end it with a quote. And you can use, some quotes are anonymous, they don't have a source. Some quotes are famously spoken from people. Some quotes come from people who you don't really recognize. You don't need to cite the source of your quote, okay? But you can if you want. And I don't want a quote that is like on the ground. I like quotes that are up here, okay? Like I say in some of your written stuff, if you're talking about anxiety, I don't want a quote about anxiety. I want a quote about courage or perseverance or self-control or overcoming. You know, the quotes should be up at 20,000 feet. They should be about patriotism or pride, you know, or pain or joy or happiness, fulfillment. I don't want the quote to be exactly about what your topic was. So if you're doing it on heart disease, don't give me a quote that talks about heart disease. Think higher. This sort of ties into the imagine stuff that we did in the last speech, where it doesn't have to be, you know, tied like this. I love quotes when I get these in class. I love it when people end with a quote and I go, what was that? Oh, yeah, now I get it. That's pretty good. You know, you can get really deep when you give a quote, okay? And then at the end of your quote, leave a couple seconds and say, thank you. We never say, that's it, that's all, it's over. Give your quote, give that 2 seconds to kind of look around and then say, thank you. Those are the requirements that are included in the introduction, in the body, and in the conclusion of this speech.